We're here at Castletown House in County Kildare on the 21st of October 2020, and we are about to go into yet another lockdown. Earlier this year, we were meant to have our inaugural formal Speaker William Conolly Summer School exploring Irish identity, diversity and reconciliation. However, instead, due to restrictions, we've now brought it to you virtually.
Yes, Wesley, and it's a pity that we didn't get that opportunity because it would have been very useful to have widened that conversation and to have the general public involved in the summer school. But nevertheless, it's available online now, and I'm sure there'll be some feedback in due course.
Absolutely, and we have had, I suppose, our own exploration over the time period. I've got to learn more about the Speaker William Conolly here in Castletown House, and I've met three, I suppose, very enlightened people that have illuminated me and opened my eyes to what is Irish identity, what is Irish culture, and what does it even mean to be Irish?
Well, yes, indeed, they've started that conversation, and if we go back a full 12 months, when both you and I were in Eason's in O'Connell Street, and we found Professor Walker's book sitting on the shelf, and we looked at it and it said Irish History Matters. And of course it was initially confusing, as he explained subsequently. The word matters is both a noun and a verb, but it did start the conversation. And of course Irish history does matter profoundly, and it influences the way we look at ourselves, the way we construct our identity in all its manifestations now. And it was really the jump off point, if you like, for the conversation which we've had over the last couple of months. When we went to the Somme Museum in Newton Ards, and we had the conversation with Brian Walker, and he gave his inaugural address, he touched on all of these issues in a very profound way, and I thought he set a very good chronology for the conversation that we want to have both this year, currently, and in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, and he certainly opened my eyes, I suppose, to Irish history, and even like things like that I've completely forgotten about, which was, the likes of, we had an Irish Parliament prior to the Act of Union, and Speaker William Conolly was the Speaker of that House, and of course, that in turn develops things like, as we've discussed and learned, was that an Irish Parliament? Or was it an Anglo-Irish Parliament, or was it a British Parliament? And these are all...
No, it was very much an Irish Parliament, but it was a product of its time. And as this place here now, which is Castletown House, is now a very safe place for a conversation about this. But William Conolly, in his role of a speaker, and Henry Grattan as the leader of the Parliament, and all of these people, these were Irish people who had an Irish view on their existence, an Irish view on economics, an Irish view on the world, which was relevant in a different context, in a different time. But all of that is like a stepping stone. It's like stepping stones across the River Liffey, which is just very close to us here. And it was one stepping stone to get you across the river to the far side. The other stepping stones have been put in place by succeeding generations and succeeding people to enable us to have a full understanding of what it ultimately is to be Irish in the 21st century. But we're only really on the first step of that journey at this particular time.
Absolutely. And of course, then we went on to meet, I was about to say Senator Ian Marshall. I suppose he was former Senator Ian Marshall, and I suppose in many ways he should be still a senator, the only unionist senator we've had for quite some time. We met him in Queen's University, and I must say I was blown away and mesmerised.
I mean, your conversation with him that day was illuminating in so many ways. He was so open, so generous in his in what he had to say, and also he displayed an understanding of identity from his perspective, which was Irish, Unionist, and European. And he was at pains to make the point that he has there's a European context to his identity, as indeed there is to ours. And it was very interesting for him to say that his children have a completely different perspective on both history, the history of our country, and their understanding of identity than he does. And of course, he's a little bit younger than me, so he has a different concept and understanding to what I have. But he also was very clear in his view that we need to actually build some bridges and to understand in a better way, the whole connection between our history in all its shapes and forms and the concept of Irish identity as it is today.
Well, what I was fascinated by, and it's only when it's only when we spoke to Éamon, that it's like, as he said, there's just under 1 million Unionists on the island of Ireland. And when you put it into perspective, that's 1/6 of the population. And I've never even thought of it like that. And as he said, some of them consider themselves British, some of them consider themselves Northern Irish, and others consider themselves Irish. And which is even more makes unionism even more complex than my limited understanding of it in the first place, I suppose.
Of course, and he also mentioned during the course of that conversation with you about the fact that Ian Paisley, at the end of it all, considered himself to be an Ulsterman and an Irishman, and ultimately had plenty in common with Bertie Ahern to enable a full discussion about where this island goes forward and so on. And then ultimately Ian Paisley was able to share power with Martin McGuinness. And you'd say, 20 years before that was never going to be possible. And yet they managed it and did it extremely well. I think one of the key things for me was, from Ian's perspective, he spoke about the influence that Seamus Mallon had on him. Now, notwithstanding the fact that they're both from South Armagh, they're both from Market Hill, fine, that would be a common denominator to begin with, but they would be politically diametrically opposed. And yet he was so impressed by Seamus Mallon, so influenced by him, and to the extent that he used many of his words in his maiden speech in Shannon Éireann. I have a slight difficulty with it to an extent in that he quoted from Seamus Mallon that it doesn't matter what we call this country as long as we can call it home. That's fine, and I think we should all aspire to that. But I think to get to that particular point, there's a more comprehensive conversation required so that we know why we're calling it home, rather than just kind of missing a few steps along the way. It's like again, back to the stepping stones across the river. All of the stepping stones have to be put in place. If you just leave a gap in the middle, well, for sure someone's going to fall into it. So it needs to be explored, I think, a little bit more. But the concept is fantastic, of course.
Oh yeah, brilliant. And then of course we went on and met Éamon of Cuív, TD, who kindly met us at Merrion Square. And I have to admit, I started talking to him, and I wasn't expecting the conversation I had with him. Like, he's the grandson of Éamon de Valera, so I had in my head it was just going to be, traditional Republican nationalist conversation, and it just was completely the opposite. He spoke about his time on the North-South Council, and like he was talking to us about he'd given funding at one stage to the Orange Order because they needed help, and of course, as he pointed out to me, that is an Irish organisation. It was founded here in Ireland. And he says that, whether we like it or not, he said, that is part of our heritage, simple as. And that is something that needs to be explored in itself. And then he had the conversation about joining, or he advocated joining the British Commonwealth, if that would reconcile, Unionists and Nationalists on the island of Ireland. I was blown away by it. I really was.
I was very impressed with it as well, and his generosity of spirit just came across in abundance, and it wasn't what I expected to get from him. I mean, the common perception of him is that he's on the extreme right of Fianna Fáil, would be very doctrinaire in his republicanism, and it's completely wrong, because clearly from the conversation you had with him, he has a very, very broad understanding of what it is to be Irish, and his point when he spoke about the possibility of, if there is to be a united Ireland at some stage down the road, and if there are to be compromises involved with that, perhaps one of them could be rejoining the Commonwealth. which of course there's nothing whatsoever wrong with that. But I thought his punchline in relation to that was that if it was good enough for Nelson Mandela in South Africa, it was good enough for Éamon Cuív. And I was just kind of blown away by it.
You and me both.
But what it
I
illustrates...
didn't know what to say to me.
Yeah, I mean, what it illustrates, though, very clearly is that we all have perceptions about people, and we all put people into political or social or religious or sporting boxes, and we think that's where they belong. But of course, it's only when you go and have a conversation with them that you discover, actually, well, it's not like that at all. In fact, it's probably the complete reverse of what you thought in terms of your understanding of them. But then it opens up the scope, if you like, for a conversation, which in its own way can be rich and informing. But you have to make the effort. Yeah. You have to actually talk to people and have a conversation and be open enough to embrace what they have to offer.
Absolutely. And in talking to all three speakers, I was in the back of my mind, I was constantly taking notes of where the summer school can go and where the exploration of Irish identity, diversity and reconciliation can go. And I'm so looking forward to 2021 and the future.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I mean, I think all that we've done this year was scratch the surface. We've identified an area that certainly needs further exploration. We need, I think, to look at Irish history and the different competing narratives and see where that has taken us. We need to move that conversation then into the whole area of identity in a more comprehensive way, and look at the various different influences on different people. And then we need then to take that into the multiplicity of identities that exist and that claim to be Irish, whether it's traditional, whether it's the new Irish coming from Eastern Europe and from Africa and elsewhere, or whether it's within the diaspora. And all of that needs to be explored. And one of the themes that we were trying to address, or looking forward to addressing in the summer school, was the whole concept of reconciliation. But I think, to be fair, if I've learned anything from this, it is that we must reconcile ourselves first.
Yeah.
We must identify ourselves positively and not negatively. And when we've all of that complete, then we can talk about reconciling ourselves with others, be it north-south, east-west, in Europe, or transatlantic, whatever dimension you want to engage in. But we have to be comfortable in our own skins first, in my view, and then we need to understand who we are, what we are, and essentially what it is to be Irish in the 21st century. All for another day.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. Well, Brendan, thank you so much. And looking forward to Speaker William Conolly Summer School 2021.
2021.